How does a man who drove a school bus, interacting with children and their families every day, simultaneously hold three young women captive in his own home for over a decade? How can a perpetrator maintain such a perfectly constructed facade, one that convinced his neighbors, his family, and even the police of his average, harmless existence? What is the internal psychological mechanism that allows a person to compartmentalize the extremes of a seemingly ordinary life, unspeakable long-term abuse, just steps away behind a locked door? Today, we're going to look at the mental health indicators of the monster in Cleveland. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I don't just talk about the crimes. I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. We look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. Be sure to subscribe and like this video if you want to learn more about the mental health and psychological indicators of true crime cases like this one. This case involves long-term captivity, violence, and abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. Let me state clearly that my analysis here is based purely on the documented facts of the case, public records, and my professional understanding of psychological, behavioral, and mental health patterns. These are my speculations, not a formal diagnosis of the criminal, Ariel Castro. The sheer scale of the duration of the captivity in his Cleveland home points toward a complex, deeply ingrained mental health profile. Based on the public record, we see strong indicators of several maladaptive personality traits and potential disorders that interwove to create the destructive pattern of behavior. The most compelling indicator of the perpetrator's psychological state is a documented history of severe and repetitive childhood abuse. This is where we begin to unearth the why. The first indicator here is childhood trauma and is linked to adult cruelty. According to notes found in his home, Castro claimed he was sexually and physically abused throughout his childhood, including being molested by a neighbor, starting at the age of 5 and raped by an uncle. His mother allegedly subjected him to daily physical and verbal abuse. The profound, inescapable violation experienced in childhood often creates trauma response that manifests in adult relationships and a need for absolute power and control. But I want to make clear here, not everybody who gets abused as a child turns into a monster like Castro. We see this transition from the victim to perpetrator. The child who felt powerless may grow into an adult who must exert total control over others to feel safe, validated, or even real. In Castro's case, he created a self-contained world in his home, a private prison where he was the supreme authority. This level of control is a psychological defense mechanism, desperately trying to reverse the helplessness that he felt as a child. That leads us to indicator number 2 here. The behavior exhibited by Castro strongly aligns with traits of antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy, though these are often mistaken for each other. His consistent pattern of deceit, manipulation, and violation of the rights of others with a complete lack of genuine remorse are hallmarks. He abducted Michelle in 2002, Amanda in 2003, and Gina in 2004 off the streets of Cleveland, luring them by feigning kindness, such as offering a ride. This manipulation shows a high level of cunning and superficial charm, which are key psychopathic traits used to nullify his victim's defensive instincts. Even when addressing the court at his sentencing, he displayed a striking detachment, saying he was not a monster, and blaming his actions on sexual addiction, while bizarrely suggesting there was harmony in the house. This denial of the reality of his victim's suffering is a classic display of callous, unemotional traits seen as psychopathy, where empathy is absent and the primary focus is self-justification. The third indicator is the need for compartmentalization and deception. A crucial fact of this case is Castro's capacity to lead a normal, integrated life while his private world was a chamber of horrors. He was a school bus driver, a position of trust, and interacted regularly with the community. His own family and daughter would visit the home, completely unaware of the women imprisoned upstairs. This requires an extraordinary level of psychological compartmentalization. He had to maintain two separate identities: the friendly average neighbor and school bus driver, and the brutal captor. The locks on the doors to the basement, attic, and garage, which his own son noticed, were not just physical barriers. They were psychological barriers, separating his reality into two non-overlapping spheres. This extreme deception is more than just lying. It's the construction of an entirely false self, a characteristic often perfected by individuals with psychopathic traits who must constantly monitor and manage their public persona. The fourth indicator here is narcissistic and sadistic control tactics. The nature of the abuse within his home was meticulously designed to inflict psychological and physical suffering, revealing sadistic tendencies driven by the inflated self of self-importance, or narcissistic personality traits. The victims were chained to poles and bedroom heaters. They were starved and allowed to shower infrequently. One victim, Michelle, reported being impregnated at least 5 times, with Castro subsequently inducing miscarriages through brutal beatings and starvation. This systematic dehumanization and torture is a manifestation of sadism, where the perpetrator derives gratification from the suffering of others, and the ultimate expression of narcissistic supply. By holding these young women's lives, bodies, and freedom entirely in his hands, he was confirming a desperate attempt to shore up an underlying fragile ego rooted in childhood trauma. Control was the motive. The long-term success of this crime relied not just on the perpetrator's psychology, but on the environment he created and the subtle clues he left. He was adept at creating gaps in the minds of the people around him. Why were those basement and attic doors constantly locked? His life was built on a series of small, unanswered questions that the community simply accepted. One particular detail, a tragic moment, was in 2004. Castro's daughter Angie received a strange message on her answering machine that contained the screams of a terrified young woman. "Get away from me!" This message was reported to the police. There may have been a mistake in the tracing, leading to a missed opportunity. The fact that the source of the screams was likely inside his own house, and yet he continued his ordinary life, demonstrates his profound psychological ability to mask the truth. It suggests that his internal narrative, the lie he told himself, was stronger than the external reality that threatened to expose him. The neighborhood, which was a typical working-class street in Cleveland, served as the ultimate camouflage. His neighbor Charles, who ultimately assisted in the escape, described Castro as simply the average stuff, someone you look at and then look away from because he was doing nothing remarkable. The normality of exterior was the ultimate psychological weapon. But while our focus is primarily on the perpetrator, we must also acknowledge the tremendous psychological fortitude of the victims. Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, their captivity was a sustained environment of trauma. When a victim is utterly dependent on their captor for survival, for food, water, and infrequent human interaction, a survival mechanism can sometimes lead to what is known and learned as helplessness, or in some cases, Stockholm Syndrome. However, the 3 women formed a bond. They supported each other, enduring the isolation and abuse together. This relationship, a true moment of light and unexpected solidarity in the darkness, is a testament to the power of the human spirit. Their mutual connection served as a powerful counterforce to Castro's psychological strategy of isolation and control. On May 6, 2013, the facade finally shattered. Amanda, seeing an opportunity when Castro left one of the secure front doors unlocked, kicked through a screen door and screamed for help. That single act was the ultimate psychological reversal. After a decade of being conditioned to helplessness and terror, she reclaimed her power, breaking free from the psychological prison that Castro had so meticulously constructed. That neighbor, Charles, he hurt her, and the nightmare ended. Castro pleaded guilty to 937 criminal counts, including rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder, as part of a plea deal that spared him the death penalty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. His courtroom performance was a final desperate act of psychological grandiosity. He denied the worst part of the abuse, maintained his self-justification, and offered a hollow apology that sounded more like an excuse. His desire to avoid accountability, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, is another clear indication of a profound lack of conscience, consistent with psychopathic behavior. 1 month into his sentence, Ariel Castro was found dead in his prison cell, ruled death by suicide. Some speculate this was the ultimate power move, a final fatal act of control to avoid spending the rest of his life as the powerless, controlled prisoner. He was no longer the captor, he was the prisoner. The man who needed absolute authority could not tolerate the reversal of roles. He preferred to write his own final chapter rather than submit to the ultimate authority of the justice system and the complete loss of control. The case of Ariel Castro is a horrific psychological study of how deep, unaddressed childhood trauma can fuel the construction of a destructive, sadistic dual life, and how the perpetrator's ultimate vulnerability is the loss of the control they so desperately craved. The most valuable lesson for us, as true crime observers, is to recognize that sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the shadows or under the bed. They are the people driving the school bus, the average neighbors, the ones who have mastered the illusion of normal life. Did anything about this case stand out to you? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more mental health analysis of true crime criminals. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.